The air over the volcanic plains of Rixus shimmered with heat, a constant reminder that life on this world demanded strength. Rivers of molten rock carved glowing scars across the jagged terrain, and geysers of superheated steam hissed like living serpents. In the midst of this inferno, the cub trial was about to begin. A brutal test of skill, intelligence, and survival, designed to separate the worthy from the weak. For centuries, no cub who failed the trial had lived to tell the tale. Kira, barely 3 Vryxian cycles old, stood at the edge of the trial arena. Her fur, sleek and striped like molten silver, was bristling with anxiety. Around her, dozens of cubs flexed claws, bared fangs, and glared at one another with a predator's intensity. The alien council, perched atop towering obsidian pillars, observed silently. Their eyes glowed faintly under ceremonial masks, reflecting neither mercy nor emotion. Kira's stomach twisted. She had trained for this moment, for what felt like an eternity, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of the trial. A horn echoed across the plains, deep and resonant, vibrating in Kira's chest. She exhaled slowly and stepped forward. The first stage was the Path of Embers, a corridor of shifting magma flows. Each cub had to leap across molten rock platforms, using speed, agility, and instinct to reach the other side. One misstep meant instant incineration. Kira's paws trembled as she scanned the path. The platforms were irregular, some wobbling, some cracking under heat. She took a deep breath and sprinted. Her first leap was clumsy. She landed on a molten edge, her claws sizzling against the rock. Pain shot up her leg, but she forced herself forward. The cub next to her, a burly male named Therix, leaped with precision, almost effortless, and smirked at her struggle. Kira's ears twitched. She couldn't afford distractions. She reached the final platform, panting and scorched, barely keeping her balance. Across the arena, the council's heads tilted in unison. Their verdicts were unspoken but clear. She had survived the first stage, but only barely. Next came the Chamber of Shadows, where cubs had to navigate a labyrinth of towering rock spires while avoiding deadly camouflaged predators. Kira moved cautiously, relying on intuition rather than brute force. She froze as a predator lunged from the shadows. Her instincts screamed at her to fight, but she hesitated. The creature's claws grazed her flank, tearing her fur. Pain, fear, and frustration surged through her. She dodged and darted forward, but the creature tripped her. She tumbled into a narrow crevice, scratching her paws and chest. The timer buzzed. Kira had failed the second stage. Before she could gather herself, a council member's voice boomed, echoing unnaturally across the arena. "The cub has failed. Euthanasia is ordered." A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Some spectators hissed approval, others whispered regret. Kira's body froze. Euthanasia, the ritual execution reserved for those deemed unworthy, was a merciless law. She had no time to process the horror. Her eyes darted around, searching for hope, but there was none. And then she saw him. Captain Elias Kane. Humans were rare on Vryxus, and Kane was an anomaly. Tall, imposing, yet calm under pressure, his armor slightly scorched from earlier environmental trials. He stepped forward, voice carrying with startling clarity. "I will not allow it." The arena went silent. Gasps echoed from alien spectators, and the council's masked faces stiffened. Kane's words were not a request. They were a command in principle, though he had no power here. Yet somehow his conviction filled the space, piercing the oppressive heat and fear. One council member snarled, their eyes narrowing. "Human interference is forbidden. You endanger your own life." Kane's jaw tightened. "And you endanger hers. One trial does not define a life. You will not kill her today." For Heartbeat, the world seemed suspended. Kira's eyes locked onto Kane's. His stance radiated something unfamiliar to the Vryxians: moral certainty, courage, and unyielding defiance. She felt a spark of hope, fragile but real. Perhaps survival was still within reach. The council erupted in shouts. The ceremonial executioners, a line of towering horned aliens with blades gleaming, stepped forward. Kane raised a hand, and for the first time, he acted with the precision of a battlefield commander. In a flurry of movement, he created a diversion, toppling a ceremonial pillar and sending smoke spiraling into the arena. Chaos erupted. Spectators screamed. Kira used the moment to scramble the safety behind a jagged rock formation. Kane moved swiftly to her side, shielding her from the council's enforcers. His voice was low but firm. "Listen to me. I won't let them decide your fate. Not today, not ever." Kira nodded, trembling, her claws digging into the scorched stone beneath her. For the first time, she felt that strength wasn't just in muscles or instincts. It was in courage, ingenuity, and compassion. She was alive because of Kane's refusal to comply with unjust rules, and that defiance lit a fire within her. From the crowd, Vorik, an elder alien warrior, watched with a mixture of fascination and unease. Kane's interference violated centuries of tradition, yet Kira's survival and the human's audacity hinted at a new kind of power. Perhaps the council had underestimated the influence of humanity, moral courage that could challenge even the most unyielding of societies. As the smoke cleared, the council reluctantly withdrew, their anger barely contained. Kane extended a hand to Kira. Her paws met his, hesitant but resolute. "You're coming with me," he said. "I'll train you. You'll survive, but on your terms, not theirs." Kira's heart pounded. The world she had known, strict rules, fear of failure, and the certainty of death was gone. Kane's presence had opened a path she never imagined, a path where intelligence, courage, and compassion mattered as much as strength. Above the jagged peaks, volcanic ash drifted in the fading light, glowing like distant stars. Kira took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to face the trials ahead, not as a cub doomed to die, but as a survivor, a student of human ingenuity, and a spark of change in an ancient alien world. And somewhere deep in the council's chambers, the whispers began. "Perhaps humans are more dangerous than we imagined, but maybe, just maybe, they are worth watching."
The heat of Rixus's plains was relentless, but it now felt almost comforting compared to the storm brewing in the council chambers. Kira crouched behind jagged obsidian rocks, every muscle still trembling from the trial and the chaos Kane had caused. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, but one thing was clear: she was alive. That had never happened before, not for any cub who had failed. And it wasn't because of her strength, nor because of her skill. It was because of the human who had refused to comply with the council's command. Kane's figure, tall and imposing, loomed beside her. Sweat streaked his face, but his posture radiated calm determination. His eyes scanned the arena, calculating. Every Vryxian enforcer, every council member, every ceremonial executioner, they were watching, waiting, furious. Kane did not flinch. "We need to move," he said, voice low but firm. "They'll regroup quickly. If we stay, they'll end you, and probably me too." Kira nodded. Her mind was spinning. I don't understand," she admitted. "Why would you risk yourself for me? You don't even know me." Kane's gaze softened slightly, though his eyes remained alert. "I've seen too many worlds bend under rules that make no sense. I don't stand for it. No one should die because someone else decided they weren't good enough. Not on my watch. For Kira, the words were almost alien, literally and figuratively. On Vrixis, rules were laws, and laws were absolute. No one had ever defied them, not for a cub, not for anything. The thought that someone could simply refuse to obey, human or not, was revolutionary. Meanwhile, atop the obsidian pillars, the council was in uproar. High Chancellor Zyrath slammed a clawed hand onto the armrest of his throne. "This human, he cannot dictate our laws. He is trespassing in our sacred traditions." His voice thundered over the plains, vibrating in the air like a low seismic pulse. The council's other members hissed agreement, their masks reflecting anger and disbelief. "Euthanasia is absolute. There is no exception," another member barked. "Remove them. Capture the human. Execute the cub." From behind the council, enforcers, the towering horned warriors with blades forged from Rixian obsidian, prepared to move. Cain did not wait for them. He grabbed Kira's paw, pulling her toward a hidden crevice in the jagged rocks. The entrance was narrow and uneven, but it offered temporary concealment. As they moved, Cain whispered, "We need to talk. Tell me everything about the trial, the council, your people. I need to know what we're up against." Kira's voice trembled. It's everything. The trial is meant to weed out weakness. Fail and you die. That's it. Euthanasia. There's no mercy. The council believes it preserves honor, strength, and the purity of our lineages. Cain frowned, absorbing the weight of her words. "And no one has ever questioned it?" "Never," Kira said, shaking her head. "Obedience is valued above life. Survival isn't the goal. Strength is. Those who fail are erased. It's normal." Cain's jaw tightened. Humans had faced arbitrary rules before, but nothing like this. And yet, he saw a spark in Kira, fragile but undeniable. "Then we'll have to change that. If you survive, it won't just be your life. It will be a statement to them, to your people." Kira blinked, unsure. Changed their minds? Can one human do that? Cain smiled faintly. One human can do a lot, especially if they refuse to give up on someone worth saving. For a moment, the tension of the arena and the trial faded, replaced by the spark of possibility. But the reprieve was brief. A shadow passed over their hiding place. Cain's hand shot to the hilt of his weapon, a sleek, human-designed plasma blade, and he pressed Kira down behind the jagged rocks. The enforcers moved with terrifying precision, their eyes scanning every crevice, every shadow. Cain's mind raced. They were fast, relentless, and trained for a world where mercy was a weakness. Yet Cain had something no Vrixian warrior had ever accounted for: unpredictability. He whispered to Kira, "Follow my lead. Trust your instincts, and don't fight them head-on." Kira nodded, gripping her claws into the rock. Cain counted silently, 3, 2, 1. Then, with calculated movement, he rolled from their cover, sliding across the scorching rock while creating a blinding spray of dust and volcanic ash. The enforcers reacted instinctively, giving Cain and Kira the opening they needed. They sprinted toward a network of fissures Cain had spotted earlier, a narrow maze that would be impossible for the larger enforcers to navigate without getting stuck. As they dove into the labyrinthine fissures, Cain explained his plan. "We're not just surviving, we're sending a message. You survived the trial, not because you met their rules, but because you didn't give up. That's strength." Kira's eyes widened. For the first time, she understood the difference between alien strength and human strength. Alien strength demanded obedience and perfection. Human strength embraced adaptation, courage, and the willingness to defy impossibility. Hours passed as they navigated the labyrinth. Kane taught Kira small survival strategies, how to read the subtle tremors of the rock to anticipate movement, how to avoid predator zones, how to use her small size to her advantage. Each lesson chipped away at Kira's fear, replacing it with cautious confidence. She felt herself growing stronger, not in muscle or ferocity, but in intelligence and strategy. Finally, they reached a hidden ledge overlooking the trial arena. The sight made Kira's blood run cold. The council was still watching, their forms stark against the burning plains, but now their gazes parried confusion and unease. Kane's interference had shaken their absolute certainty. A low growl echoed behind them. Kane froze, then turned, hand on the blade. A Vryxian predator had found them. Kira's heart raced. This was a moment where instinct, courage, and human tactics would collide. Kane gestured to her, whispering, "Use your speed. Think like I taught you. Outsmart it. Don't fight it." With trembling paws but clear purpose, Kira lured the predator through a series of tight fissures, exploiting the narrow maze to trap it momentarily, while Kane created a diversion with plasma pulses. The predator roared, confused, before finally retreating. Kira's chest heaved. She had done it. Survival was no longer dictated by tradition, it was dictated by ingenuity. Kane's voice cut through the echoing rock. "See? You survived, and this is just the beginning." Kira looked at him, eyes bright. "Then we can really change things?" Kane nodded. "We will, one step at a time. But first, we survive, then we fight for more." From the shadows, Vorik, the veteran alien warrior, watched. He had expected fear, despair, and obedience from the cub. Instead, he saw courage, fueled not by tradition, but by human defiance. Something was shifting in the air, subtle but undeniable. The world of Vryxis had just glimpsed a force it had never known: humanity. And for Kira, the cub who had failed the trial, the nightmare of death had transformed into a path of survival, mentorship, and rebellion. The stage was set for the struggle that would shake not just her world, but the entire alien civilization.
The labyrinth of fissures had become their sanctuary, a narrow, twisting refuge away from the prying eyes of the council and their enforcers. Kira's paws ached, her fur was scorched, and her chest burned with every breath. Yet, for the first time in her young life, fear was tempered by hope. She was alive because of Captain Elias Kane, the human who refused to follow the rules. And now, survival meant more than running. It meant learning. Kane led her to a hidden cavern that opened onto a plateau overlooking the volcanic plains. From this vantage point, the arena looked small and distant, the council's pillars like black specks on a molten horizon. Kane turned to Kira, his expression serious. "Survival isn't just about strength," he said. "It's about adaptability, creativity, and using your mind as much as your claws. If you rely only on what your traditions taught you, the next trial, whatever form it takes, will kill you." Kira's tail twitched nervously. "But my people, they value strength, instinct, fighting with honor. What you're teaching me, it's different." "That's the point," Kane said. "Different can save your life. Different can win battles your people didn't even know existed. Watch, learn, adapt. That's how humans survive. That's how humans win against impossible odds." He began with observation drills. Kira crouched behind rocks while Kane set traps, small mechanical devices that would trigger alarms or signals when touched. At first, Kira froze. Her instincts told her to attack, to pounce, to rely on speed and aggression. But Kane shook his head. You won't always fight head-on. Sometimes survival is knowing when not to fight. Slowly, Kira began to notice patterns. A shift in the ash wind, the tremor of a distant predator, the subtle glow of minerals under the molten rock. Kane guided her to anticipate threats rather than react. Her reflexes, once raw and uncontrolled, began to sharpen with strategy. Then came endurance exercises. Kane forced her to climb vertical cliffs of obsidian, navigate geysers of boiling steam, and sprint across lava flats under the punishing heat. Kira stumbled again and again, her fur scorched, her claws cracked. Yet Kane never allowed her to quit. Pain is temporary. Giving up is permanent. Remember why you're here. Remember why I saved you. One evening, as molten rivers reflected a blood-red sky, Kane introduced Kira to an entirely new concept: improvisation. He had rigged a series of obstacles with loose rock, smoke, and reflective minerals. The exercise was simple in words: get across without being seen or caught. Kira's first attempts failed spectacularly. She tripped, tumbled, and made too much noise. Kane shook his head. You're thinking like a Vryxian cub, predictable, relying on instinct alone. Stop trying to fight the environment. Use it. At first, Kira didn't understand, but slowly she began to improvise. She used loose rocks as diversions, sliding smoke from geysers to mask movement. She bounced across uneven ground, weaving shadows into her favor. Kane's approval came in the form of a rare smile. Better. Now you're learning. The weeks blurred together in a relentless cycle of training. Kane's methods were harsh for human standards: long hours, punishing exercises, constant mental challenges. But each one honed Kira's mind and body in ways the Council's rituals never could. She began to see patterns in the trials, anticipate danger, and improvise solutions. Her strength wasn't just physical anymore. It was tactical. But their progress did not go unnoticed. From atop the obsidian pillars, Vorik, the veteran alien warrior, observed in growing fascination. He had expected Kane to fail, expected Kira to collapse under pressure. Instead, he saw transformation. The cub, who had barely survived the path of embers, was now agile, alert, and cunning. Kane's interference was shaking more than the Council's confidence. It was shaking their understanding of what made a warrior strong. Not all aliens were pleased. Whispers traveled quickly through the arena and council chambers. The human is corrupting the cub. She is no longer pure. She is learning foreign tricks. This is an insult to our traditions. Others murmured unease at the cub's growing skill. Vorik, however, felt something different, a reluctant admiration. Humans, he realized, value traits Vryxians had long ignored: ingenuity, courage, and moral choice. The turning point came during a simulated predator hunt. Kane had constructed a holographic beast capable of movement and attack patterns based on real Vryxian predators. Kira's task: survive and neutralize it without direct combat. At first, she panicked. The predator moved faster than anything she had faced, jaws snapping, claws tearing the simulated ground. Instinct screamed to attack, but Kane whispered from the shadows: think, don't react. Predict, outthink. Kira froze, then observed. She noticed the predator favored ambush points near shadows and predictable paths. Slowly, she maneuvered, leading it into her traps, using the terrain to her advantage. She bounced across uneven ground, weaving shadows into her favor. Kane's approval came in the form of a rare smile. Better. Now you're learning. Kira's tail lashed. I can't believe I'm doing this. This isn't what I expected from training. Kane shrugged. You're not expected to follow tradition anymore. You're expected to survive. Amidst the rigorous lessons, Kane also taught Kira about human concepts alien to her: teamwork, empathy,
moral courage. He explained that life was more than rituals and strength was more than obedience. Kira began to understand that her failure in the trial wasn't an end, it was a beginning. But there were consequences. Reports of Kira's survival and Kane's interference reached the council. High Chancellor Zyrath summoned Vorik to speak before the council, demanding insight into the Cub's unprecedented progress. Vorik's testimony was cautious, reluctant to praise Kane openly, but the evidence was undeniable. Kira had grown stronger, faster, smarter, and more resilient in ways no traditional training could achieve. The council murmured in disbelief. This human is dangerous. He undermines centuries of tradition. He endangers the purity of our lineages. Vorik hesitated, the weight of his conscience pressing. Perhaps strength is not only in obedience and instinct, he admitted quietly. Perhaps the Cub's growth shows another path. The chamber erupted in outrage. Debate flared, enforcers bristled, and the council's authority shook. Kane's training, though not unseen by the general population, was already planting seeds of cultural upheaval. Back in the hidden cavern, Kira sat exhausted but exhilarated. She had learned to survive, not by following rules, but by questioning them. Kane looked at her with approval. "You're ready for the next challenge," he said. "The real trials are coming, but now you have something they never taught you: choice." Kira's eyes glimmered with determination. "Then I'll survive, and I'll show them there's more to strength than they know." Outside, the volcanic plains burned under a dying sun, and the first whispers of change rippled through Vryxian society. The cub who had failed was no longer weak. She was becoming something new, something her people had never expected. And humanity, through Kane, had planted the first seeds of revolution.
The council chambers of Rixus were a cathedral of shadows and jagged obsidian. High above the molten plains, the domed ceilings reflected the faint glow of volcanic eruptions, painting the chamber in streaks of red and gold. Here, centuries of rigid tradition had been preserved, unchallenged and unquestioned. And yet, today, the air was thick with tension, the kind that vibrates in the claws and teeth of even the most disciplined Vryxian warriors. Vorik, a veteran of countless battles and one of the few warriors trusted to observe the trials impartially, sat in silence atop the highest tier. His body, scarred from centuries of combat, was rigid, yet his mind churned with unease. He had witnessed Kane's interference with the cub trial and Kira's transformation, and despite himself, he could not deny the truth he saw. The cub, Kira, was no longer the timid, trembling juvenile who had failed the path of embers. She moved with precision, eyes sharp, claws ready, mind calculating every step. Kane had taken what the council considered failure and turned it into an advantage. And now, Vorik had to reconcile this reality with the doctrines he had sworn to uphold. "Impossible," muttered one of the junior council members, pacing near the edge of the chamber. "No cub, no matter how trained, should achieve this level of skill in such a short time. The human, he's corrupting her. This is dishonor." Vorik's gaze flicked toward the council member. Corruption, perhaps, but also evolution. Kane was introducing concepts alien to their rigid culture: foresight, improvisation, moral judgment, and adaptability, traits that had long been undervalued, even despised. Yet here they were, turning a cub who had failed into a potential warrior unlike any the council had ever seen. High Chancellor Zyrath's voice boomed, echoing through the chamber like rolling thunder. "Vorik, speak plainly. Is this cub truly prepared for the trials, or has the human's influence rendered her unfit for our sacred traditions?" Vorik inhaled deeply. He weighed his words carefully.
One misstep could see him exiled or worse. "Chancellor," he began, his voice measured, "she has been transformed. Not by the usual methods, not by tradition, but she is stronger, more perceptive, and more capable than any cub in recent memory. The human's influence has granted her advantages our methods do not teach. I cannot ignore her progress." A ripple of murmurs swept through the council, disbelief, skepticism, anger. Vorik continued, his tone firm despite the rising tension. "Her abilities are unconventional, yes, but they are undeniable. She survives where others would fail. She anticipates danger, improvises solutions, and adapts to challenges that would kill a traditional cub. This is not dishonor." One of the senior enforcers slammed a clawed fist against the obsidian floor. "This is blasphemy. To suggest a human-trained cub could surpass our warriors is to question the wisdom of our forebears." Vorik did not flinch. He had spent centuries defending the traditions of Rexus, but he had also learned that blind adherence to ritual could lead to predictable failure. Kane's methods were a threat, yes, but also a revelation. In Kira, he saw something extraordinary, a bridge between alien tradition and human ingenuity. As Vorik spoke, his mind drifted back to the trial itself. He had watched Kira stumble across the path of embers, falter in the chamber of shadows, and face the council's decree of euthanasia with wide, terrified eyes. And then Kane had intervened. With a courage and moral certainty that was entirely foreign, the human had defied their laws, risking death to save a cub who had failed. Vorik remembered the shock of that moment, the hush that fell across the arena, the gasps from the crowd, and the anger in the council's eyes, and the spark in Kira, the first flicker of hope she had ever known. It had been mesmerizing. The council debated fiercely. Some argued for immediate punishment of Kane, claiming his actions were a threat to Rixian culture itself. Others, quieter and more cautious, wondered if Vorik was right. Perhaps Kira's survival and transformation were proof that rigid tradition was not the only path to strength. Vorik observed the arguments with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Humanity's influence, though alien in every sense, was teaching him something he had long resisted acknowledging. Adaptability and moral choice were as important as raw strength. Kane's presence was not simply interference, it was evolution in action. As the council squabbled, Vorik's thoughts returned to Kira. The cub had grown in ways that no cub had ever before. Her mind was sharp, her reflexes honed, and her courage had blossomed under Kane's mentorship. She was no longer merely a survivor of circumstance. She was becoming a warrior of unprecedented potential. And the council, blinded by tradition, failed to see it. He could see it clearly. In Kira's eyes, the spark of defiance was entwined with curiosity, intelligence, and moral courage. She would not simply follow orders. She would think, adapt, and overcome. And in doing so, she could challenge centuries of rigid customs, not just through rebellion, but by demonstrating that human influence, strategy, and decision-making had a power all of its own. Vorik sighed and leaned back, realizing the enormity of what was happening. Kane was not just teaching a cub to survive. He was teaching the Rixians something they had long refused to learn. Strength alone was no longer enough. Courage, adaptability, and intelligence, the traits Kane embodied, were equally vital. He knew the council would resist. They always resisted. But seeds had been planted, and if Kira survived the coming trials, if she could harness the lessons Kane had taught her, those seeds could grow into a fundamental shift in Rixian society.
The elder warrior's gaze shifted to the distant cavern where Cain trained Kira. The cub was leaping across jagged rocks with new confidence, improvising moves Cain had taught her, each step a testament to human ingenuity. Vorik could not deny it. The humans, defiance, once reckless, was now creating a new kind of warrior, one who might surpass even the council's finest soldiers. A quiet voice from behind him interrupted his thoughts. A junior counselor leaned close, whispering urgently, "Vorik, if you speak openly about Cain's methods, you risk everything. But what you're seeing, it cannot be ignored. How do you reconcile it?" Vorik remained silent for a long moment, watching Kira execute a precise maneuver taught only hours ago. Finally, he spoke, voice low but steady. "We reconcile it by recognizing the truth. The cub has learned something our tradition cannot teach. The human has shown us another way to define strength." The whispering counselor's eyes widened. "Another way? You mean to suggest we acknowledge Cain?" Vorik shook his head. "Not yet. But if we do not, we risk losing more than one cub. We risk losing the chance to evolve. Humanity is dangerous, yes, but it is also enlightening." The council erupted in argument once more, but Vorik had made his point. He could not stop the whispers of doubt now spreading through the chamber. Cain's methods, though unconventional and unsettling, had achieved the impossible. And Vorik, warrior, veteran, observer, understood that Rixus had glimpsed a force it had never accounted for. Human ingenuity, moral courage, and adaptability. Kira, unaware of the full weight of the council's turmoil, continued her exercises. Her claws struck rock with precision, her mind calculating each step, her eyes burning with determination. She had survived death, defied tradition, and begun to grow in ways no cub had ever before. And under Cain's guidance, she would continue to grow, stronger, smarter, and more resilient than anyone on Vrixis had ever imagined. Vorik watched, silently, knowing that this cub and the human who refused to bow to their rules would change everything. The first cracks in tradition had appeared, and from those cracks, a new era was quietly emerging.
The council had deliberated in secrecy for cycles, debating Kiara's fate and Cain's interference. Finally, they decreed the deadly trial, a mission designed to test every ounce of skill, cunning, and resilience a cub possessed. This was not a test of obedience or ritual. It was a trial against the very elements of Vrixis itself. Failure would mean death, not just disgrace. Kiara stood at the edge of the obsidian ravine, her claws gripping jagged rock as she gazed down at rivers of molten magma snaking through the canyon. The heat radiated up in waves, shimmering the air with distortion. Steam hissed from hidden fissures, and jagged rock towers loomed overhead, hiding predators that had long made the ravine their hunting ground. Every instinct screamed danger, but Cain crouched beside her, calm and commanding. "You've trained for this," he said, voice low. "Not the way your people train, not the way the council expects. You've learned to think, to improvise, to survive. Now it's time to prove it." Kiara swallowed, her throat tight. I know the council expects me to die here. They've never let anyone survive a wraith hunt. Why do you believe I can?" Cain's eyes were steady, unwavering. "Because you've already survived the impossible. You've survived what no cub should. Now you survive this." At the council's signal, a low horn echoed across the ravine. Shadows shifted on the cliffs. From hidden crevices, predators began to emerge, wraith beasts. enormous creatures with serrated claws, spindly legs, and a chilling intelligence. Their eyes glowed faintly red, scanning the terrain, smelling, listening, and anticipating. Each predator had killed dozens of cubs before. None had ever survived. Kiera's heart pounded. This was the moment she had trained for, yet it felt infinitely larger, infinitely more dangerous than anything in practice. Cain whispered, "Observe first. Don't engage yet. Learn their patterns, their instincts. Adapt." The first wraith lunged from a shadowed cliff. Kiera froze, then remembered Cain's training. She dodged to the side, letting it crash against a rock, then darted forward, using a fissure to mask her approach. The predator snarled, spinning toward her, but she had already calculated its path. Timing, improvisation, and anticipation. The lessons Cain drilled into her muscles and mind now became instinct. One by one, the predators closed in. Kiera leapt across molten rock platforms, narrowly avoiding a claw swipe that could have severed her tail. Lava bubbled below her, sending up waves of heat that would have stunned a traditional cub. She used loose stones to mislead the predators, creating diversions that forced them to collide with each other. Cain's voice echoed in her mind. Think, adapt, survive. The trial was relentless. Another predator, larger and faster, launched a coordinated strike. Kiera ducked behind a geyser, steam obscuring her from view. But the creature was clever, circling her position. She remembered Cain's improvisation drills, the lessons on using environment as advantage. Leaping from a jagged outcrop, she triggered a small rockfall that sent the predator tumbling into a molten stream. Its roar echoed off the ravine walls, a mix of fury and confusion. Cain's voice came from behind, steady and guiding. Good. Keep moving. Don't fight their way. Fight your way. Kiera felt her fear transform into clarity. Every jump, every dodge, every miscalculation was now a lesson. She began to anticipate predator behavior, predicting attacks before they happened. She used reflections in molten rock to mislead them, shadows to mask her movements, and the uneven terrain to funnel them into traps of her own design. The trial was relentless. Another predator, larger and faster, launched a coordinated strike. Kiera ducked behind a geyser, steam obscuring her from view. But the creature was clever, circling her position. She remembered Cain's improvisation drills, the lessons on using environment as advantage. Leaping from a jagged outcrop, she triggered a small rockfall that sent the predator tumbling into a molten stream. Its roar echoed off the ravine walls, a mix of fury and confusion. Cain's voice came from behind, steady and guiding. Good. Keep moving. Don't fight their way. Fight your way. Kiera felt her fear transform into clarity. Every jump, every dodge, every miscalculation was now a lesson. She began to anticipate predator behavior, predicting attacks before they happened. She used reflections in molten rock to mislead them, shadows to mask her movements, and the uneven terrain to funnel them into traps of her own design. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time had become irrelevant. Sweat mixed with ash, first singed and matted, paws raw and bleeding, but Kiera pressed on. Cain stayed at her side, guiding but never taking over, allowing her to solve problems in real time. Suddenly, a massive predator, the alpha wraith, emerged, its size dwarfing all others, its claws capable of crushing rock, its gaze unerringly focused on Kiera. She froze, heart hammering. Even trained cubs avoided the alpha. It was a living nightmare, a shadow that haunted the ravine. Cain's hand gripped hers. You can do this. Remember what you've learned. Outsmart it. Don't overpower it. Kiera's mind raced. Strength would fail here. Speed would fail. But adaptability, cunning, and strategy could win. She observed the alpha, noting its weight, its timing, its tendency to overcommit on lunges.
Using a narrow fissure as cover, she baited it forward, dodging at the last possible second and causing it to strike the molten edge. Sparks flew, heat crackled, and the Alpha staggered, but it was not defeated. Thinking fast, Kiera leapt onto a precarious rock ledge, higher than the predator expected. She used a combination of weight, leverage, and the unstable terrain to trigger a rock slide, sending debris cascading into the Alpha's path. It roared, enraged, struggling to maintain balance as it plummeted dangerously close to the magma below. Kiera exhaled, barely daring to hope. It had worked. She sprinted across the ravine, using every trick Kane had taught her. When the last predator lunged, she led it into a narrow canyon, where its size and weight made it vulnerable to missteps. With a well-timed jump, she forced it into a fissure that collapsed partially, trapping it safely away from her path. Exhausted, bleeding, and singed, Kiera finally reached the far edge of the ravine. The horn sounded again, a signal that the trial had ended. Silence fell. The council, watching from their pillars, was stunned. No cub had ever completed the deadly trial. Yet here she was, victorious, not by brute strength, not by blind instinct, but by intelligence, adaptability, and courage. Humanity, through Kane, had shown her that there was more to strength than obedience or tradition. As molten rivers glowed beneath the fading Reixian sun, Kane helped Kiera to her feet. "Rest now," he said. "The real challenges are only beginning, but you've proven something extraordinary. Life is not dictated by rules. It's dictated by will, intelligence, and courage." Kiera looked back at the ravine, at the Alpha Wraith trapped below, and then at Kane. Her fur bristled, not with fear, but with resolve. "Then I'm ready," she said, "ready for whatever comes next." And somewhere in the council chambers, the whispers of doubt and fear began to spread. Humanity had left its mark on Reixian tradition. Kiera had survived the deadly trial, and nothing, not even centuries of rigid law, would ever look the same again.
The volcanic plains of Rixus were quiet, but the air buzzed with anticipation. News of Kira's survival of the deadly trial had spread faster than magma through fissures. Across the council chambers, debates erupted in heated whispers. For centuries, no cub had survived the Path of Embers, the Chamber of Shadows, and now the deadly trial. And yet here she stood, alive, scarred, yet more formidable than anyone had predicted. High Chancellor Zirith banged his clawed fist against the obsidian dais. "Impossible!" he roared, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the chamber. "No cub could endure all 3 trials. This human intervention is an abomination." But the council's younger members, the observers, and even some enforcers who had witnessed the deadly trial firsthand could not deny the facts. Kira had survived. She had used ingenuity, adaptability, and strategy, skills no cub had ever been taught in the sacred ways of Rixian trials. For the first time in living memory, the council faced a challenge to its authority that could not be silenced by tradition alone. Vorik, the veteran warrior, stood silently to the side, his thoughts conflicted. On one hand, Kane's influence had shattered centuries of rigid training and discipline. On the other, he could not ignore the effectiveness of it. Kira had survived. Not because she was stronger or faster in the ways Rixians measured strength, but because she had learned something new, a human way of thinking. Meanwhile, Kira and Kane approached the council chamber, their steps deliberate. The air was tense. Kira's fur was singed, her claws scraped, and her body bore the marks of the trial, but her eyes burned with determination. She was no longer a cub defined by failure. She was a survivor, a strategist, and a force that no council could dismiss. As they entered, murmurs rose. The council's enforcers shifted uneasily, and whispers filled the chamber. "She's alive? How?"
By cheating tradition, perhaps? Kane's voice was steady and commanding. No, she survived because she adapted, learned, and fought with intelligence. Not by brute strength, not by following rules blindly, but by thinking beyond them. That is strength. A silence fell. The council members glared, their ancient traditions clashing with the undeniable reality before them. Kira stepped forward, her voice clear and firm. I failed the trial once. I was told my life would end because of it. But I survived. Not because I was stronger than the others, but because I learned, because someone refused to let me die unjustly. High Chancellor Zireth's claws twitched, a sign of barely restrained rage. You dare to speak to us? You dare defy tradition, defy the council? Kira met his gaze. I did not defy tradition. I survived it, and I show that strength is more than obedience. Strength is intelligence, courage, and the will to continue even when all rules say you should fail. The room erupted in chaos. Some council members hissed and slammed their claws in outrage. Others whispered nervously, unsure how to respond. Vorik stepped forward, his voice measured but firm. High Chancellor, for the first time, we have seen a cub survive beyond the limits of tradition. She did not fail. She has proven something none of us expected. Zerat's eyes blazed. She has survived only because a human intervened. This is interference, corruption. We cannot allow it to continue. Kane stepped forward, unyielding. You've spent centuries valuing rules over life, tradition over intelligence, but your methods are failing your people. This cub, Kira, represents a new way. Adaptability, ingenuity, moral courage. Traits your species has ignored for too long. You can punish me, but you cannot erase what she has proven. The chamber fell into uneasy silence. Vorik's jaw tightened as he weighed the implications. Humanity's influence had been a shock to their system, a force no tradition could contain. And yet, as he watched Kira stand tall, scarred but unbroken, he realized the truth. She had survived not in spite of Rixian tradition, but because she had learned to combine it with something new. Perhaps, Vorik said carefully, we have underestimated the value of other methods. Kira has survived where others would not. We must consider what we can learn from this, from humans. Some younger council members nodded hesitantly. Whispers turned into cautious discussions, and the rigid authority of the High Chancellor faced the first cracks it had ever endured. Change, long resisted, had arrived in the form of a cub who refused to die, and a human who refused to obey. Outside the council chamber, the volcanic plains reflected the council's turmoil. Kira's triumph was not just personal, it was cultural. Across the arena, other cubs had witnessed her survival. For the first time, failure was no longer absolute. For the first time, the next generation saw that life could be preserved, that ingenuity could outweigh raw strength, and that courage could redefine honor. Kira turned to Kane, and gratitude shined in her eyes. You saved me. You showed me that survival is more than obedience. Kane smiled faintly. You saved yourself. I only guided you. Remember that. You've proven that one life, one choice, can ripple through an entire society. High Chancellor Zirath paced in fury, but even he could not ignore the outcome. For the first time, tradition had failed to dictate the result. The cub who had failed, the cub who had been sentenced to death, stood victorious, alive, and more capable than any of her peers. The council members reluctantly acknowledged the truth. Kira had not only survived, she had thrived. The deadly trial, designed to eliminate weakness, had inadvertently demonstrated the power of human-inspired ingenuity, adaptability, and moral courage. For centuries, Vrixian society had equated strength with obedience and instinct. Now it was clear that strength also came from intelligence, strategy, and the refusal to submit to unjust rules. Vorik, watching Kira closely, felt a shift within himself. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new era, a time when Vrixians could embrace both tradition and innovation, instinct and intellect. Kane's influence had shown them a path forward, and Kira's triumph proved that path was not only possible, but necessary. As the council debated what to do next, Kira raised her head, scanning the room. Her fur was scorched, her paws raw, and her body bore the marks of the trial, but she was unbroken. She had faced death itself and survived, not because of the council, not because of luck, but because she had learned to think, to adapt, and to fight in ways no one had ever expected. For the first time, the council realized that the cub they had tried to erase had become more than a survivor. She had become a symbol that strength was no longer defined solely by obedience, ritual, or tradition. Strength could also be defined by intelligence, courage, and moral choice. The echoes of Kira's victory would ripple through Vrixian society for cycles to come. Tradition had been challenged, authority had been tested, and one cub, guided by a human who refused to comply with unjust rules, had proven that life and change could never be stopped by fear or rigid law. Kira looked at Kane, and for the first time she felt the full weight of her journey. She had been destined to die, but now she had a future where she could shape her own path, where she could survive and thrive, and where she could redefine what it meant to be strong in a world that had long refused to question its own rules. Outside the council chamber, the molten plains glowed with the dying sun. Kira's shadow stretched long across the scorched rock, a symbol of triumph against impossible odds. Humanity had left its mark, and Vrixis would never be the same.
The plains of Rixus had quieted since the deadly trial, but the calm was deceptive. Kira's victory had reverberated far beyond the council chambers. Across the volcanic continent, word spread among warriors, hunters, and clans, some inspired, some enraged. Yet it was not only internal unrest that demanded attention. Humanity, though strange and enigmatic to the Rixians, had also drawn the gaze of other forces lurking in the shadows. From the far edge of the molten expanse, scouts reported unusual activity. Creatures unlike the wraiths, moving with calculated coordination, their armor reflecting the fiery light of the lava rivers. They were faster, smarter, and armed with technology Rixians had never encountered. Kane observed them through a pair of modified optics, jaw set. "These aren't just predators," he said. "They're organized, they're hunting, and they're tracking us." Kira's tail twitched, a mixture of fear and determination coursing through her. What are they?" she asked. "Invaders," Kane replied grimly. "They've seen the effects of humans on your species. They've seen the cubs survive the deadly trial. Now they want to eliminate both of us before you can inspire change." Vorik arrived from the council's observation post, eyes narrowed. He had expected political repercussions, not an external threat. "High Chancellor, this is unprecedented. Our defenses are concentrated on ritual arenas and territorial borders. We are not prepared for a coordinated assault like this." Zyrath hissed, claws scraping the obsidian floor. "Then we adapt, or we perish. Kira's defiance has drawn attention. If she survives, so will the spark of change. But these invaders, they will not care about tradition." Kira stepped forward, her voice steady. "Then we fight them, not as Rixians or humans, but together. We've survived worse already." Kane nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Exactly, and this time you won't just survive, you'll lead." The first wave struck at twilight.
Shadows surged across the volcanic plains, and the alien invaders moved with unnatural coordination, wielding plasma-laced weapons and advanced exosuits. They descended on outlying outposts, their attacks precise, almost surgical. The Rixians, unprepared for strategy beyond brute force, struggled to respond. Kira and Kane coordinated with Vorik, moving quickly to reinforce positions. "Don't just charge," Kane instructed. "Use the terrain, make traps, force them into narrow chasms. Outsmart, don't outfight." Kira's mind raced. Every lesson, every improvisation drill, every survival exercise she had endured now became critical. She instructed squads of young Rixians, showing them how to use jagged rock formations as cover, how to anticipate the invaders' attack patterns, and how to employ clever diversions. Her voice carried authority, not through fear, but through clarity and strategy. The first clash was brutal. Plasma rounds cut through molten steam, creating bursts of glowing ash. Wraiths and Rixians collided in raw ferocity, but Kira's tactics allowed smaller squads to flank and trap the invaders. Kane fought beside her, agile and relentless, disarming and neutralizing threats with a combination of human ingenuity and quick thinking. At one critical moment, an invader squad attempted to flank from above, using grappling spikes to descend toward Rixian warriors. Kira assessed the angles, calculated timing, and improvised a trap. She loosened a narrow ledge, creating a cascade of falling rock. The invaders were caught in the collapse, momentarily stunned, giving Kane and the Rixians the upper hand. Vorik watched from a distance, astonished. "I have never seen strategy executed like this," he muttered. "Not by a cub, not by any warrior. She fights with intelligence, with insight, not instinct alone." But the invaders were relentless. They adapted to Kira's tactics with terrifying speed, forcing her to improvise on the fly. One armored unit advanced through a narrow canyon, using kinetic shields to deflect rockfalls. Kane whispered, "Then use their weight against them. Lead them where the terrain does the work." Kira's mind raced. She calculated angles, leverage, and timing, guiding her team into positions that exploited every structural weakness of the canyon. Plasma fire ricocheted off the obsidian walls, and the air shimmered with heat. One misstep could kill hundreds, but Kira's cool thinking turned potential disaster into opportunity. The battle raged for hours. Lava rivers split and hissed, geysers erupted unpredictably, and smoke obscured vision. Yet Kira adapted continuously, reading patterns in enemy movement and environmental hazards alike. Kane's human perspective complemented her instincts perfectly. Together, they orchestrated a battlefield in which strategy trumped raw strength. Finally, the invaders retreated, wounded and disoriented, unable to counter Kira's ingenuity and Kane's guidance. The volcanic plains lay quiet once more, scorched but reclaimed by their defenders. The Rixians, exhausted and battered, turned toward Kira. For the first time, they saw not just a cub, but a leader. Not because she was the strongest, but because she was the smartest, most adaptable, and bravest among them. High Chancellor Zyrath approached, fury and reluctant respect battling across his face. "You survived this?" he demanded. Kira met his gaze calmly. "Not just survived, we won. Not because of brute force or obedience, but because we adapted, we thought, and we refused to surrender." Vorik nodded slowly. "She has demonstrated something the Council has never acknowledged. Strength is more than raw power. Strategy, adaptability, and courage are equally vital. Humanity has taught us this lesson through Kane, and Kira has proven it." The implications rippled across Rixian society. For centuries, obedience and ritual had defined strength. Now, Kira's actions combined with Kane's guidance had rewritten the rules. Young cubs whispered her name with reverence. Warriors reassessed the value of intelligence and innovation. Even hardened council members could not deny the shift. Change had come, and it had been forged in fire and strategy. Kira's gaze shifted to Kane. "We've survived, but
They'll be back. They always adapt. Kane's expression was grim but confident. Then we adapt faster, and when they return, we'll be ready. You're not just a survivor anymore, Kira. You're a strategist, a leader, a symbol. The future of your people is in your claws, and you're ready for it. As night fell over the molten plains, the stars reflected in the rivers of lava like shards of silver. Kira, Kane, and Vorik stood together looking out at a landscape forever changed. Humanity had left its mark not just through Kane's defiance, but through Kira's growth. And now a new threat had tested their ingenuity, proving that intelligence, courage, and adaptability were more potent than any rigid tradition or brute force. Kira's tail flicked with determination. This was only the beginning. The new threat would return, and when it did, she would be ready. Not as a cub, not as a follower of tradition, but as a leader who combined the best of Rixian strength with human ingenuity. Rixis had glimpsed the future, and for the first time, it shone with the spark of possibility.
The volcanic plains of Rixis were still smoldering from the recent battle, but the atmosphere had changed. Where there was once rigid obedience and unquestioned tradition, there was now curiosity, awe, and cautious hope. Kira had survived the deadly trial and led the defense against the invaders. Her victories had shifted the balance of power, not just physically, but culturally. High Chancellor Xyrath sat in his private chamber, claws tapping the obsidian floor. He had spent cycles trying to rationalize Kira's survival, trying to frame it as luck, interference, or defiance that would ultimately fail. But the evidence was undeniable. The cub who had failed the traditional trials had become a symbol of what Vryxian society had long ignored: intelligence, adaptability, and courage. Vorik entered, his expression grave but resolute. High Chancellor, the Council can no longer ignore the reality. Kira has proven herself beyond any traditional measure. The young are inspired, the warriors respect her, and the external threat revealed that innovation is essential for survival. Xyrath's claws clenched. Change is dangerous. Our society has survived for centuries because we adhere to ritual and discipline. But perhaps there is merit in what you say. Perhaps the cub's success cannot be denied. Outside the council chambers, Kira stood on a jagged cliff, overlooking the lava rivers that had been both battlefield and crucible. Her fur was still singed, her claws scarred, but her eyes were bright with determination. Kane stood beside her, silent, watching her survey the land she had helped protect. "Kira," Kane said softly, "you've done more than survive. You've changed everything. Your people will never be the same." Kira turned to him. "I didn't do it alone. You taught me to think differently, to adapt, to challenge fear. You showed me that survival is more than following rules. It's about choosing the right action, even when the rules say otherwise." Kane smiled faintly. "And now you can teach others. The next generation of Vryxians will learn not just strength, but intelligence, courage, and innovation. They'll see that one cub with the right guidance can rewrite what is possible." The council convened to formalize the changes. Kira was summoned, not as a cub, but as a recognized leader and strategist. Young warriors and council members alike looked on with respect and curiosity. Some hesitated, bound by centuries of tradition. Others watched eagerly, seeing the possibilities her survival represented. High Chancellor Xyrath cleared his throat. "Kira of Rixis," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority tempered with reluctant admiration. "You have survived trials none should survive.
You have demonstrated that strength is not measured solely by obedience or instinct, but by intelligence, courage, and adaptability. You have redefined what it means to be strong in our society." Kira bowed her head respectfully. "Thank you, High Chancellor. I only did what I believed was necessary to survive, and now I hope to help others do the same." Vorik stepped forward. "The Council has agreed to implement new training programs. Cub training will now include adaptability, strategy, and moral decision-making, lessons inspired by human methods. Kira will lead these programs, ensuring that the next generation of Reixians is prepared for challenges beyond our traditions." The chamber erupted in murmurs of approval and cautious excitement. Change once feared was now seen as essential. The younger generation of cubs looked at Kira with wide eyes, inspired by the cub who had defied death and transformed society. Outside, the volcanic plains were alive with movement. Young warriors practiced new techniques, combining traditional combat with improvisation and strategy. Kira led some drills herself, showing cubs how to anticipate attacks, use terrain to their advantage, and think creatively under pressure. Kane observed, proud of the cub who had grown into a leader capable of shaping an entire civilization. As the sun set over the molten horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold, Kira reflected on her journey. She had been sentenced to death, failed the trials, and faced enemies both internal and external. Yet through guidance, perseverance, and courage, she had survived, and in doing so, she had changed the world. Vorik approached, nodding in respect. "You've done what few could imagine. Vryxian society owes you a debt that cannot be measured in words. You've shown us that survival and strength require more than brute force. They require thought, courage, and adaptability." Kira's tail swished thoughtfully. "Then our work isn't over. There will always be threats, challenges, and obstacles. But now my people understand that failure is not the end, and that rules are not always the path to survival. We can face what comes next, together." Kane placed a hand on her shoulder. "And when they come, you won't just survive, you'll lead, teach, and inspire. You've become more than a cub. You're a symbol, Kira, of what's possible when courage meets intelligence." The council watched from above, recognizing that the old ways had not disappeared, they had evolved. Tradition and innovation would coexist, shaping a stronger, more resilient society. The victories against the invaders had proven the necessity of change. The deadly trial had demonstrated the power of adaptation, and Kira, once a cub marked for death, now stood at the forefront of a new era. Across the plains, the young cubs practiced with newfound enthusiasm, inspired by her example. Warriors debated strategy instead of relying solely on instinct. Even the older council members begrudgingly began to integrate human-inspired tactics into their training regimens. Kira's survival had sparked a revolution, not through rebellion, but through undeniable proof that intelligence, courage, and adaptability could redefine the very meaning of strength. Kira looked to Kane, her mentor, her guide, her ally. "You showed me what it means to fight differently. But I think I can do even more now. I can show my people how to combine our strengths with what you taught me." Exactly. And that's what makes this lasting. You're not just surviving for yourself. You're ensuring that Vryxis evolves, that your people can face threats no one could have imagined before. The stars reflected in the molten rivers below, a tapestry of light mirrored in the blackened rock. Kira stood tall, her fur bristling, eyes sharp with determination and clarity. She was no longer a cub defined by failure. She was a leader, a strategist, and a symbol of hope. A new era had begun on Vrixis, one in which survival was not dictated solely by tradition, but by intelligence, moral courage, and the will to adapt. Humanity had left its mark, not through conquest, but through guidance and example. Kira had become the embodiment of HFY principles, a testament that even in an alien world, ingenuity, determination, and courage could reshape the future. And as the first wave of young warriors trained under her guidance, Kira knew the legacy of this era would endure. The Council had been forced to evolve, the invaders had been repelled, and Vryxian society now had a future in which adaptability and intelligence were as valued as strength and obedience. Kira's gaze swept across the plains, past the lava rivers, towards the horizon. Somewhere out there, new challenges would arise, but she was ready. She had survived the impossible, defied expectations, and led her people into a new age. And for the first time, Vryxis, scorched, battle-hardened, and transformed, could look forward to the future.